NATO intelligence is well aware of the enemy's plans. They also confirmed that Russia wants to continue the offensive. How is that possible? For 9 days, we've seen fierce war. They're destroying our cities, shelling our people, our children, residential neighborhoods, churches, schools. They're destroying everything that allows us to live a normal life, a human life, and they want to continue. Knowing that new strikes and casualties are inevitable, NATO deliberately decided not to impose a no-fly zone over Ukraine.
And Ukraine's president is to speak to U.S. Congress later today as lawmakers consider a request for $10 billion in emergency funding for humanitarian aid and security needs. For more, let's speak to our foreign editor, Armen Georgian. Hello to you, Armen. A very powerful statement we're listening just before that from Vladimir Zelensky. And this isn't the first time he's called for a no-fly zone, but we did see more and more anger from him in that statement.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, he's definitely putting the pressure up on NATO, but NATO is certainly not, at least not publicly, changing its stance on this no-fly zone idea. It was again rejected by Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State. There are really two schools of thought on this issue. Well, one is that declaring a no-fly zone would mean having to enforce it, of course, which means shooting down Russian planes, which means war between NATO and Russia. It's also been pointed out that Russia changed its military doctrine in 2020 to give nuclear weapons a more central place. The other school of thought says that how much does Putin actually really distinguish between a NATO-supplied Javelin missile blowing up a Russian tank crew and theoretically a missile blowing a Russian plane out of the sky? In other words, according to that school of thought, from Putin's perspective, NATO is deeply involved already on the side of Ukraine. But clearly the US is firmly in that first school of thought, and to that end, it's established this deconfliction line of direct communication with the Russian Defense Ministry.
Yeah, now, Armen, since the West is ruling out, as you point out, the no-fly zone for now, what is it focusing on instead?
Well, various elements. Well, firstly, military aid, of course, using a method tried in Syria a decade ago. That's to say, funneling arms to opposition groups, as it was then in Syria, across borders from neighboring countries. A kind of similar thing is being used now. Obviously, flights with weapons supplies are not possible. There's financial aid for Ukraine that's continuing. Indeed, there's a planned call later today between Zelensky and U.S. senators, where the U.S. considers a $10 billion emergency funding package, including humanitarian aid, and of course now renewed efforts to try to secure these 5 nuclear plants that Ukraine has. Now, in theory, that is something that Russia and Belarus should be open to, given that a nuclear disaster would, of course, impact Russia and Belarus as well as Poland and other neighboring countries. But it's not clear at this point exactly how an agreement on that could be reached.
All right, Armen, thank you very much. Armen Georgian, France 24's foreign editor.